All right, today we are talking about the book Cry the Beloved Country, written in 1948 by Alan Paton. This book is about apartheid in South Africa and some of the complications that obviously come along with apartheid. And we're talking about it in the context of ideological criticism. We're talking about on the back end of ideological criticism because we specifically want to look at the main character of this, who is a priest named Kumalo. All right, and what this main character does in this book is he's trying to sort of weave through the complications of apartheid without being an ideologue. And we're going to sort of talk a little bit about his summary, or excuse me, we're going to summarize a little bit about sort of his story in this book. And yeah, we're going to talk about how he avoids trying to be an ideologue throughout this process, right? And obviously a very difficult political process that didn't end until the early 1990s. With this book, like all books that I use, I highly recommend if you're a student in my class, you read this book. It's a relatively short book. I don't like to sell books on the length of them, but I know that everybody is not into reading 400 or 500 page novels. This one is relatively short. And there is a movie, Cry the Beloved Country, that the main character, Kamala, is played by James Earl Jones, who is an incredible actor. I do not like the movie. I am not a sort of book snob who says, the book is always better than the movie. I think there's plenty of really good movies that have been created out of classic books. Cry the Beloved Country as a movie, I don't think is one of them. I just think it's too short of a movie to fully capture the complicated status of the characters throughout the novel. So I definitely would just recommend reading the book. I mean, I don't even think the movie's that great of a movie just on its own, unfortunately. All right, so there we have it. All right, so we're going to talk about Cry the Beloved Country, and we're going to sort of bring in some of these things about ideological criticism we've discussed. Before we can talk about it, we just need to understand South Africa. So this book, again, was written in 1948. In South Africa, we have colonization going on. All right, the Dutch and the British had colonized South Africa. There's also apartheid going on, so a very sort of segregated, in the United States, you can think about like the Jim Crow South, right? So there is this sort of just dynamic of blacks and whites living in very, very different worlds. Apartheid was interesting with regard to the fact that blacks made up approximately 80% of the population and whites only made up 20% of the population, but because the colonies, the colonialists got to put people in positions of power, they just, all the white people were in power. So there weren't these sort of free and open elections where, black majorities could get together and elect, a native South African black man to the presidency of South Africa. Whites were in charge, even though they were in the, minority as far as the population was concerned. This was also sort of on the back end of Gandhi when this book was written. So Gandhi spent his early years from 93 to 15. He spent them in South Africa. Again, India was a British colony up until about this time, right? 1947, I believe, is when India got its broke free of colonialism. You can check the date on that. And then shortly after Gandhi is assassinated, right after British gets its freedom, or excuse me, right after British rule leaves India and India gets its freedom, so India becomes its own country again. Gandhi's in South Africa for his early career, right? So again, India is a British colony. You have colonial powers in South Africa. So it wasn't uncommon for people are kind of bouncing around. Gandhi can travel pretty freely between India and South Africa. He's a lawyer, and he's not really sort of crossing in, even though they're on different continents, they're both, propped up by colonists. So Gandhi does some of his early work in South Africa as a lawyer, and he starts learning a lot about nonviolence and how to sort of push back against these colonial powers. He takes some of those lessons from South Africa, takes them back to India, and then works with individuals in order to break free, to help India break free of the colonial powers as well. So Gandhi spent a large amount of time in his early years in South Africa as a lawyer. Nelson Mandela is also in South Africa. You probably heard the name before. He spent 27 years in prison because he was leading these very radical movements in order to break apartheid, right, and to sort of end colonialism in South Africa. As soon as he is freed from prison in the early 90s, he's elected to the presidency. So he becomes, this president of South Africa right after apartheid ends, after he spends nearly 3 decades of his life in prison. So this is what's going on in South Africa. Just a very, very, you know, difficult, complicated, oppressive type of place when it comes to black and white relationships, which is a central theme in Cry the Beloved Country. All right. So this is what this is the context in which this book in 1948 is being written. How do we deal with a world where there's a mixed race society that is operating under apartheid? How does Kumalu, the main character, he's trying to he's this beacon of sort of breaking free from these group camps of like us versus them mentality, and he's trying to find humanity with everyone who lives in South Africa, both blacks and whites, even though he is a black man from South Africa. All right, so this is sort of his this is how he sort of operates throughout the novel, and this is why it becomes just a very extremely important character when you want to think about ways to not be an ideologue, right? To make sure that you're not sort of digging your heels in and just trying to pick in a team and hoping your team wins. This Kumalo character, he does a really good job of trying to navigate the complicated relationships that go on with people who he agrees with, people he doesn't agree with, people who's different from him. Right? This is what his role is in this book. So, under apartheid, what problems occur? Obviously, there's lots. The very obvious one for Black Africans: discrimination, inequality, and disenfranchisement. If anybody's ever heard of franchise, winning the franchise or something, that means vote, right? So, just for those who are unaware, disenfranchisement, you're not allowed to vote. All right. So, this is an obvious problem, right? Inequality, that's not good, right? Being treated differently under the law, right? That's not good. The book also sort of lays out and sort of showcases various problems, if you will, for Anglo-Africans, so white Africans. So people who were born in South Africa, right? It's like their ancestors might have colonized South Africa, but now they're born into South Africa as white people, right, of either Dutch or British ethnicity, and they run into a lot of sort of problems too. Right? Now, not the legal problems that the Black Africans run into, obviously, but there's a lot of just difficult problems that they have to think about, right? So, what's it like to be born into the legacy of people who have colonized and very brutally oppressed a group of individuals, right? So if I just sort of come to consciousness, one day when I'm like 6 or 7 years old, and I'm like, hey, I live on this place, I live in this place called South Africa. My family's been here for, 3 or 4 generations. I really didn't choose to be born, nor did I choose to be born on this land in which 3 or 4 generations ago, my ancestors, kind of, colonized it and took it over. How do I act in this land? That's a complicated question that plenty of groups have dealt with throughout throughout human history. Whites also, they have a fear of losing power, right? Especially because they're quantitatively sort of in the minority. It's only 20% of the population. And then you also have this problem, right? Which is one of the which is an interesting problem at the center of the book here. For those whites who don't have any power, right? So we're not talking about powerful whites who are making the laws and really oppressing people. We're just talking about average farmers and grocery workers who happen to be white. It's like, how do non-powerful whites, or some of them, are subjected to the crimes of frustration from Black Africans, right? So what do you do when you have a lot of working class people who sort of are fighting out the ideological battles of these powerful people at the top? And this is what some of just the working class whites in this book, as well as in reality we're having to deal with in South Africa, where I didn't choose to be born in South Africa. I didn't choose for my ancestors to come and colonize this place. I can empathize with the frustrations of the native black South Africans here. But I also, don't want my store robbed, right? I also don't want to, walk around my neighborhood in fear. Like, how can we sort of reconcile this, even if I don't have any power, because I'm not a part of the ruling class of white colonizers, sort of at the type of either the Dutch or the British system. All right, so that's what's going on, the complications that are going on in this book. So let's talk about the main character right here, Khumalo, right? So again, James Earl Jones, right? He's a Zulu priest, and he goes on a journey to Johannesburg to find his family. So he gets a letter, and he's like, okay, I got to go to Johannesburg, which is a big city, right? And he goes there, and he's just a sort of a quiet priest living in a quiet little area, in the countryside. But he's like, hey, there's some things going on with my family. I need to get to Johannesburg. When he gets there, he's confronted with a lot of difficult realities. The first is that his sister has become a prostitute. His brother has become a radical who has, the way that the book put, has abandoned his tribal customs. So his brother is a radical to the point of this us versus them mentality, right? There's no way to reconcile this at all. It's just sort of, his brother's an ideologue. His brother says, I'm right all the time. Everyone who disagrees with me is 100% wrong, and I'm not even going to give credence to sort of being open-minded and listening to people with different ideas, right? His brother has to protect the narrative, which is something we talked about in the last video with the trial by social media, right? It's like protect the narrative at all costs. Even if I'm wrong, I'll never admit I'm wrong because I don't want to even give the other side the ability to critique me. And then finally, unfortunately, Khumalo finds out that his son has murdered a white citizen, and the white citizen was sort of an innocent bystander, right? And this is a reality. It's not a question of like, okay, we're gonna go to trial and see what happened. It's like his son murdered a working class white person who had nothing to do with anything, was just a white person who was trying to do charitable work within the white and black communities, right? So it's just sort of like a do good, progressive, very liberal white person kind of hanging out with everybody and trying to do good work. His son ends up killing him. And so this is what Khumalo is faced with when he gets to Johannesburg, right? He say like, how do I reconcile this very broken country when I realize that, white colonizers have come in and sort of ruined everything, right? But now there are white people sort of in this land who had nothing to do with the original colonialization of it. And I realize that there are some black Africans that I know who are running around, committing crimes or being awful as well, right? So Khumalo is trying to figure this out for himself. So what might he wrestle with, right? So he sits there and he's like, who are the good people and who are the bad people, right? When you're focused specifically on ideology instead of principles or values, you only become concerned with winning the argument instead of what's doing right. And I know I've mentioned this before when it comes to our friend Socrates. Socrates didn't like the idea of quote unquote winning an argument. Socrates was like, we need to engage in debates because we need to find a solution. I'm not interested in engaging in debate just so that I'm correct, just so I get my way, right? So Khumalo is going around. He's like, look, I want black Africans to remember their tribal values as opposed to revenge. So his brother, Khumalo's brother John, is like very focused on revenge, right? He's very much an ideologue who's like, we need to get revenge on the whites who are currently in South Africa. And Khumalo says it's not who we are as a people. This is not part of our tribal values. We need some sort of reconciliation. We need to sort of learn to live with this new reality that we're in. This isn't going away anytime soon. So this is what Khumalo is trying to wrestle with, right? And we get to this first question. It's like, who are the good people? Who are the bad people? The book sets it up, and it's like, well, it's complicated. Like, some people are good, some people are bad. Everybody's kind of both, really, though. Right? There's some good things in all of us. There's some bad things in all of us. And Khumalo's trying to navigate that to sort of see good and bad on both sides. And he's trying not to be an ideologue. So some examples you can think of here is when you think about like modern day politics. Modern day politics are very what we call tribal, right? So think to yourself, like, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? And you can say, you're a libertarian, you're a Green Party, whatever. Like, if you had to just pick one of these two, which one would you lean mostly towards, right? And then you have to think about this question, right? It's like, is either party 100% right about everything? And here, if you answer yes, you're an ideologue, because what that means is that you are willing to defend your party at all cost, right? Even if you know that you're, skirting the truth, you're telling a lie, you're omitting certain facts, you're not giving people credit who have different politics than you, just because you don't ever want to give up any room. All right. So if you're a person who goes around and is like, the Democrat Party's amazing and it's always correct, 100% right about everything, and I want them to win everything, and the Republican Party is all evil, it's like, well, you're an ideologue, right? Like, you're probably not, and vice versa is true. If you're a person who's like, Republican Party is the best thing ever, they should win every election, and the Democrat Party is unpatriotic and they want to destroy America, and it's like, you're an ideologue, right? The thing is that neither party is 100% right about everything. Both parties kind of have this messy middle thing that they got to kind of work out. All right. So this is a little thing that you can do for yourself. Okay. So what is one position from the other party that you actually agree with? All right. And you might have to think hard, because maybe you've never thought about it before. Maybe you have been pretty hardline, ideological person, sort of, with regard to your party. So you might have to think a little bit, but my guess is that, every time I've ran this in the classroom, I've never had a student say nothing. I agree with nothing on the other side of the aisle. What is one position from the other party you actually agree with, and what is one position from your own party that you actually disagree with? All right. So you can say, it's perfectly fine to say, look, I don't even remember the example I used last time. I'll say I'm a Democrat this time. It's perfectly fine to say, look, I'm a Democrat, but, I think, Donald Trump's tax plan was actually pretty good. And, the fact that I walk out of my job with $200 extra in my pocket that I don't have to pay taxes is pretty great, right? You can do that, right? You could say, look, I'm a very strong Republican, but you know what? The whole Republican line on abortion it's a little bit too much. And I'm actually, I'm pretty pro-choice. And if the Republican Party would just get rid of that pro-life stuff, like, that would be better, right? So figure out, like, what party do you lean towards more, and you should be able to find issues that you agree with on the other side and you actually disagree with your own party about. All right, that's a pretty good indicator that you're not an ideologue. And this is, again, we go back to Kamalo here, in Cry the Beloved Country. This is his role as the main character. He goes around and he sees people who are just doing this whole, like, I'm on the side of the whites, I'm on the side of the blacks, I'm not going to cross the line, I have no interest in learning about the other side is completely evil, our side is 100% right all the time. And Kamalo's walking around saying, like, this isn't the world I want to live in. He's like, you don't get to pick the world you want to live in. He's like, here's the world. Like, the world is the fact of the matter is that, South Africa is multiracial now. And he's like, okay, so how are we going to do this? Right? There, you can't just say, like, we're going to just get rid of the other side completely. It's like, at the end of the day, a political election, for instance, you can't just say, like, get rid of the other party, because, tomorrow it's like, your neighbors are still going to be your neighbors, right? The guy across the street is still going to, have a Trump flag up, or the lady who lives next to you is going to have a Biden-Harris sticker on her car. It's like, at the end, like, you still got to live together. And that's what Kamalo's trying to do here, is telling everybody, we can't be ideological about this. We have to find a different way, as opposed to an us versus them mentality. All right. If you have an us versus them mentality, if you have this idea where my side is always right and your side is always wrong, you're an ideologue. All right. So it's a fun little experiment to do. All right. Try this out. Try to find one thing that you agree with on the other side that you actually disagree with, sort of your own, party about. A couple more things here, just sort of post-apartheid. Now, this is no longer the book. This is actually what happened in South Africa, in the early 90s. They created what's called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. All right, so here we have Desmond Tutu, and then over here on the left, this is Nelson Mandela, and on the right over here is Desmond Tutu. All right, so these two individuals sort of led what was called the sort of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was a way of saying, we want to create a system where there's no big revenge, right? But we do want to make sure that we move forward as equals. So what they focused on is this thing called restorative justice. that sort of helped everybody move forward, right? And how can we have this sort of peaceful transition of power? How can we make sure that everyone feels welcome? They didn't want to sort of go after. Here we go, right? If you were a white person in a position of power before this, right, and you were a perpetrator, right? So you carried out unjust laws, right? You had to confess to human rights abuses, right? People were not punished for their crimes during apartheid if the act was carried out for political lawful, and by lawful I mean legally allowed reasons. So obviously there's lots of injustice that happened, but if it was sort of like, hey, if you were a cop and the law said you were allowed to do X and you did it, even if it was like a terrible thing to do, as long as you came forward and said, look, mea culpa, I take responsibility. Let me figure out a way to sort of make this correct in some sort of restorative way. There was a way in which, again, led by Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, they said, okay, let's try to figure out a way to move forward. We don't want revenge. We just want people to acknowledge what they did, and then sort of move forward in an appropriate fashion where we can kind of get past this, because we all now are going to live together. All right, whites and blacks. All right. And for those who are American, this is very similar to Abraham Lincoln's mandate post-Civil War. So this is one of the most fascinating things, I think, that happened in American history. There's a few key moments in American history that I'm like, that was kind of, that's kind of a very interesting move. After the Civil War was over, Abraham Lincoln, his mandate was tell all those Southern soldiers and everybody in charge of the South, just tell them to go home. Right? Abraham Lincoln didn't want to have big, war trials for war crimes. He didn't want to prosecute a bunch of people. He didn't want to drag this out. He just said, look, Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis, just surrender, and we'll have some conversations for Reconstruction, so we can get the Southern states back into the United States, and we're gonna figure out this emancipation of the slaves that are currently in the South. He's like, we're gonna figure, but he's like, I don't want this big trial where we're just kind of going after revenge and putting us through more pain. All right, and that's kind of what's going on in post-apartheid South Africa, again led by Desmond Tutu as well as Nelson Mandela. Finally, all right, last thing I'll mention here is fun little exercise. Well, maybe not fun's probably the wrong word, but exercise I do with my students is, if you're not an ideologue, right? If you're a person who's not committed to ideology, but you are committed to values and principles, okay? Here's a little test you can do for yourself, okay? So if your values are justice, right, nonviolence, honesty, treating people kindly, compassionate, then you must do that towards all people, even when those people aren't that great, right? Even when you disagree with those people, right? If you're a person who says, I'm tolerant and I'm kind and I'm compassionate to people who are also tolerant, kind, and compassionate towards me, then you're not any of those things. What you are is a normal human being who you're kind to people who are kind to you, right? That's not a character, like that's no longer a characteristic. That's just you being a normal person, right? I'm kind to people who are kind to me is something that all people on the planet do for the most part. All right. So, but if you say like, look, I have these values, right? And again, this goes back to this character, Kamalo, right? Kamalo is like, I have these deep tribal values from my Zulu culture that tell me to act in a certain way, and I'm going to try to act in that way, even towards the white people in South Africa who colonized the black Africans and are sort of implementing unjust laws, right? He's trying to hold on to those characteristics even in the face of people and a system that is oppressing him, all right? So again, the question, like, are you really a nice person if the only people you treat nicely are those who are nice to you? Are you really living in according to your values if your values are only present during those moments when your life is good? And the answer is no, right? If you only act nice to people who are nice to you, that doesn't mean you're a nice person. That just means you're a normal person. If you act nicely towards people who treat you like garbage, right, you have a pretty strong character and values, right? And I'm not saying this stuff is easy. I'm just saying, this is a good test of character. Same thing is true with your values, right? If your values are never tested, I don't know what your values are, right? But if as soon as your values are put to the test and you're like, I'm still gonna act in a compassionate, kind way, even though I don't like this other person, then you have strong values. Okay, it's easy to be a good person to those who are good to us. It's easy to live according to my values when life is good. When life gets hard, right, and you're like, forget my values, I'm gonna, come hell or high water, right, by any means necessary kind of stuff. You don't have strong values, right? It's very easy to live according to good values when everything is going well in your life, right? When things go bad, that's when your values are put to a test. All right, when people treat you like garbage, that's when your values are put to a test, right? You can only claim to have certain values when you hold true to those values even during difficult moments in your life. All right, if you're only concerned about your side winning, yeah, then you're going to demonize the other side, right? You're an ideologue. All right, you're a person who's committed to ideological power, right? But if you're a person who's like, I'm committed to values and principles, and my values are, kindness, compassion, fairness, justice, whatever your values are, right? And then to test those values, you have to figure out, can I uphold those values during difficult moments? Can I uphold those values towards people who are different than I am, who hold different values than I am? Can I uphold those values to the political party who didn't vote for the candidate that I voted for? And if you can, you have strong values. If you say, no, I'm going to get rid of my values and I'm just going to, be very mean and nasty to those other people because I want to win, that's ideology, right? If you're only concerned about winning, that's ideology. If you're concerned about values and character and, holding on to those things, that's a lot better way to sort of approach the world. All right, so figure out what your values are, and then no matter who comes across your path, you're going to treat all those people in accordance with your values, even when those people might not be treating you so well. All right, okay, that's all I have for Cry the Beloved Country. Read the book. I cannot stress it enough. It's an extremely important book. Kumalu is just he's a great character in world literature. As a person who is trying to thread this needle of the complicated situation he has found himself in when it comes to apartheid in South Africa. When you have these what's called like one-dimensional characters, where it's like this character's all good or all bad, it's that's not a very interesting story, right? But when you have characters who are like, it's complicated, right? There's some good things, there's some bad things. There's people in my life who I love to death, like his brother John, but he's a bit of a radical. His son who ends up killing somebody, right? Kamala comes across white people and he's like, they're kind of treating me like garbage, but I don't want revenge against them. I just want everyone to kind of treat each other equally. And then you kind of get into the 1990s with this truth and reconciliation stuff that's going on with Tutu and Mandela. It's some pretty incredible stuff. All right. So read the book. It's great. And don't be an ideologue. All right. See you later.